Kinds of verbs. Hey guys, it's me, Mr. Fincham, and this is the first video that we've had for our flipped classroom for English. Now this video is just going to be a quick overview of verbs, then we'll have another one added to it that actually shows us how to find some of the things I'm just going to read off here. Okay? So this is going to be really quick, straightforward, and then we'll actually get down to the specifics of it, where we have to find the verb and see what type of verb it would be. So, what is a verb? A word used to describe an action, state, or occurrence, and forming the main part of the predicate of a sentence, such as hear, become, and happen. Now, if you looked at that, you saw action, occurrence, which is the same thing, but also state. Okay? That's going to form the basis for the two main types of verbs, action and being, or linking. So, let's learn about those. Action verbs. A word that tells what the subject has or does, and it can express physical or mental action. So physical, if you can actually see it happening, run, jump, kick. Mental, if it happens more inside your brain. Fear, hope, or think. Those all can be actions, but you could be doing them without ever moving at all. Now, being verbs. That is not referred to an action, but it describes a state of being. It tells what the subject is or feels. Okay? Some common ones would be, appear, become, and seem. For example, if I say, this video appears awesome. Well, it's not physically appearing at all. I'm describing it. A state of being, which would be awesome. Now, sometimes being verbs can be linking verbs. They are that only when they connect the subject with the word and the predicate. If you see these examples here, you can see how the verb connects in each instance the subject, in this case he, to teacher, a description, okay, or a renaming of sorts for that there. And you see that with I and doctor, the sky and dark, and then meal and good. In each instance, they're connected via that verb. Okay? Now you can take a minute to read this sum up by yourself. Verb expresses action, mental or being. And then when you have linking verbs, that's connecting them from the subject to the predicate. Okay, guys, in this section, we're going to learn, to look at a sentence and how you can figure out the verb is and actually what type of verb it is. So, when you look at a sentence, you can basically break it down into two sections, our subject and our predicate. Our subject is, who's performing an action. Our predicate is, what they're actually doing. All right, and I know we've broken that up before in our unit to sentence. So if we look at this first word, Raymond became brave. Okay, our action word that we see in there, whether it's not an action verb or not, our verb is became. Okay, typically speaking, when we go over these things together in class, I know a lot of times you pretty much can find your verb pretty well, but you can't always figure out if it's action or linking. So I'm going to show you a couple ways you can do that. The first way is that I like to do is just to take a form of be. Okay, since this is became, that's past, I'm going to use was. See if it makes sense. Okay, so if we sub in the word was, Raymond was brave. Now, if it makes sense, that'd be a check, and this does. And does it change the meaning? Became brave, you see a little bit of a process. Was brave. It really doesn't change meaning too much. Okay? Sometimes another thing you can do is take a simple action word and sub it in and see if it makes sense. Okay? So what about if we put in ran? I like to use ran because that's pretty simple. Raymond ran brave. That really doesn't make sense. Okay? And secondly, what I like to do a lot of times, let me erase this for you, get it out of our way here, is I like to look at this word and say, became what? Brave. All right. So I look at this word now, brave, and I say, is brave a state of being? Is it describing something in this subject? In this instance, I would say yes. Brave links to raiment. Okay? So, brave links to raiment because brave is actually a state of being. It's describing raiment. And since it's describing, that lets me know that it is a linking verb. Okay? Now, let's look at this one. He plunged ahead. All right? Our verb in this instance is plunged. Now, I look at it, and let's do a few things. Try to sub in was again, because it's past tense. He was ahead. Now, he was ahead technically makes sense, but does it change the meaning? That's the question you have to ask. He was ahead, although it makes sense, does kind of change the meaning, because when you see the word plunged, okay, it's a process. He didn't start ahead. He eventually got there. And was does not work for that. Okay? Let's try a simple word that we know is an action word. He ran ahead. That does make sense. Now let's do our one more thing here. Plunged. Well, plunged what? Well, you can't really answer that question because the word ahead tells you where he plunged. Now here I'm going to get a little deep on you. If we're saying he plunged where, the only possible way that you could get somewhere, a physical place, if this is actually an action verb. Okay? So, because this little action verb makes sense, and we're physically talking about a movement here, and we know that because this word ahead, that has to be an action verb. Okay? Now, he smelled the garlic. Alright? He smelled the garlic. Our verb is smelled. Now, smelled what? Well, we're talking about the garlic. Now, is the garlic something physical? Yeah, it definitely is. Garlic has a definite aroma, so he's physically smelling something. When he's actually physically smelling something, you know it's got to be an action verb. Now, if you still don't believe me, how about this? He was the garlic. That doesn't make sense at all, right? He cannot physically be the garlic. That's how we know it's an action verb. Okay? Now, what about this one? Got the same word, which can be tricky. It smelled so good. Okay, well, let's think about this. Good is describing this smell, right? Now, is good a state of being? Yes, it's describing it, isn't it? Since it's describing it, you guessed it, we've got another linking verb. And just to make sure, remember there's one more thing you can do, and that's this. It was so good. Guess what? Pretty much keeps the same type of meaning. It was so good. It smelled so good. Okay? And then this one, his task was successful. I'm going to teach you a little something right now. Whenever you have something that's already a form of be, am, is, are, was, were, okay? Guess what? You know it's going to be a linking verb. Alright? And just to make sure we understand that, this word successful, oh, man, didn't really mess up till then, right? This word successful, tried to get too fast. This word successful points to the task, right? Because that task was successful. Alright? Let's go to the next page here. Okay. Now, let's do a few more here. Now, I realize like some of you guys might like this page, but let's take a look. Here's another thing I want you to realize. Sometimes our verbs are hidden in contractions. So, if you look here, it's so fluffy. We're talking about unicorn. Really, what you're saying is it is so fluffy. So our verb would be is. And is what? Fluffy. Now, Is fluffy a state of being? Is it describing something? Or is it a physical action or place? No. Because of that, we know it's a linking verb. Also, remember, am, is, are, was, were. That should be a red light giveaway. Now, one of my favorite parts here, he talks about all the things he stole, and he says he wants to steal the moon. I changed the sentence for the purpose of this, because the original sentence would say something along the lines of, we are going to steal, pause for dramatic effect, the moon. But that would be a little more complex than our first lesson. So, stole what? The moon. Now, the moon is an actual physical object, okay? It's not a state of being. Because it's a physical object, he's actually doing the stealing. Well, you got it. Action verb. Now, I commit crime with both direction and magnitude. That's what Vector says, okay? He's kind of a cool dude. So, commit what? Crime. Okay. Now, is crime a physical thing? Is that something he's actually doing? Yeah. You should know that from confirmation. When you talk about commit, that's an action, isn't it? Okay? I am crime, I was crime. Does that make sense? Or grew was the moon. If you subbed in that, would that make sense? No. What about I am crime? No. That's one of the ways that you can tell, remember, if it's action or not. Now let's go. I got one more page for you. Got some sentences that will correspond here. Edward looked at the apple. Here's Edward. He's looking at the apple. Now, in that instance, okay, we're talking about Edward looking at the apple. You can see it right here. He's physically looking. Because, guys, sometimes subbing in a word gets kind of confusing. But if you can look at every sentence, find your verb, and figure out, is this an action happening? Okay? And this can be confusing when you have the same word. In this instance, yes, look, this picture depicts a young boy looking at an apple. Okay? Now, in the same way, this one, the apple looked rotten. Looked. And here, take a look at this picture. The only way it could ever be an action is if the apple could physically look. Do apples have eyes? No, they don't. So, yeah, you guessed it. That is not ever going to be a possibility. Okay? So, because apples don't have eyes, we know this one. Oh. Action verb. Linking verb. Bella felt the tree. That's going to this one. Now, she's physically feeling it, isn't she? That makes it an action verb. The tree felt bumpy. Well, guess what? A tree can only feel if it has hands and can physically touch something. The action of feeling, no. That would be a linking verb because a tree can't feel anything. Okay? Unless you're talking about Pocahontas. Okay. Well, guys, hope you learned at least the basics of kinds of verbs.